Hi everybody, this is Chris. These are tapes that I've had. These are reel-to-reel tapes that I've had for, I think, about 25 years. I'm trying to think of where I got them. When you collect records or tapes, things that people don't necessarily use a lot anymore, and they find out that you have collected these things, such as 8-track tapes. I have a lot of 8-track tapes. People find out, oh, my mom had a bunch of 8-track tapes. She wants to get rid of them. You want them? Sure. And that's what's happened to me with 78 records, with regular vinyl for a long time. Now it's back, so not so much anymore. But I did collect vinyl for quite a while and enjoy my collection. And reel-to-reel tapes was definitely one of those things that's, it's kind of an audiophile thing for 70s nerds, and I'm more of an 80s, 90s nerd. But I lived in Arlington, Massachusetts, and I believe I got these tapes from a friend that worked at the video store that I worked at on the weekends. It was Video Horizons, I believe, in Arlington, Massachusetts, and I think the fella's name was Stan Geary. These tapes are from his father or his grandfather, who I believe was named Stan. Joanne Geary is mentioned in some of these tapes, but I think that was Brian's mother. So I believe that might have been Stan was maybe Brian's grandfather. But anyway, he was involved. I think he was a lawyer. He taped a lot of conversations. Maybe he was a consultant. But these series of tapes revolve around a supermarket chain from the Boston area. One of the first supermarket chains ever, really. It was interesting discussions. I believe they were just kind of talking about different ways to improve business, different business models. They're all from about 1964. This one with a fellow named Dick Spears is from 1964, February. No, actually, it was May 14th, 1964. And they're just talking about hierarchy in the store system, which is really interesting because they're still talking about things like that, like independent control if you're in a chain and the manager has control over the certain stores and what they can feature on end caps and things like that. I mean, as a vendor, I worked in supermarkets for more than 10 years, and I know exactly the kind of talk. But it's really kind of interesting to me because these guys are old school. Some of them talk about, oh, back in the 1920s, we did it this way. That was 100 years ago. So, to me, this is a very fascinating slice of life. I don't think there'd be any kind of problems with any kind of copyright infringement or any trade secrets. It's actually really interesting and good to hear these folks in management talk about people. They're actually saying my people, and I care about my folks and my people and this and that, and it's very heartwarming. There's nothing untoward. There's no real talk of bashing anybody or any other chain or anything like that. And it's funny because Stan obviously is a highly educated man, and you hear the cadence in his voice. You could tell he's smoking a pipe, because they're all smoking, probably in the back room or in the offices of on D Street, and that'll give you a little clue on what chain this is referring to. But there's nothing untoward about these tapes. They're actually quite refreshing. The grocery manager type guys, old guys, they're smoking cigarettes or cigars or something. You could tell that, and they're just old school, customer service oriented folks from back in the day. Maybe they didn't go to college. I didn't go to college. Really great accents, in the New England accents, and just a fascinating look at, to me, Now, some people are going to think this is stupid, and I don't care. I post what I want to, and I don't monetize because I don't care. I don't care. This is for me, and if anyone likes it, then I'm happy. I'm happy anyway, so I don't really need anybody's approval. But anyway, this is really inside baseball. This is really inside baseball on the supermarket chain, which really started the whole supermarket thing. And fascinating look at this. Nothing, like I said, no trade secrets, nothing that's going to get a cease and desist order sent out to me, because it really shows a favorable look at this time period where people were actually concerned about employees and had a work ethic and cared about the community. And even though it's back in '64 where people sometimes, weren't as, for instance, like all the guys, it's all men in management, and they all talk about that, like, oh, my men and this and that, because there was no women. The only woman you hear about on the tapes is when the secretary walks in. I'll leave it at that. I have more of these, and I will post them as I go. And if people like them, then great. If they don't, change the channel.
Well, I'll just talk into this for a minute, will you? Nick, just as a test to see if we're picking up anything on that machine. This is a pretty good mic. We have had a couple of difficulties. One of them has been a little bit of scratching in there due to a lack of a tight fit.
Well, does this work all right?
Pardon? Yeah, it's a very good mic. It picks up beautifully. I've been extremely pleased with it by and large. And the nice thing about it is that you don't worry about rigidity. You can move, you can stand up and irate, talk, whatever. Well, we probably have got enough on. Yeah, that is, I'm very pleased. This is a better office for recording than anything I've had previously. Is that air conditioning unit something that can be turned off?
We really don't have one.
Oh.
Well, this end of the building was built for open space.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been trying to live feeding from the general thing. We just about concluded that my Scottish approach of trying to avoid having a machine is ridiculous. Because last week, man, it was terrible in here.
Mm-hmm.
So Harold's looking to see if he's got a window unit that he can put in.
Yeah.
This is cold in the winter, hot in the summer. We've tried to get along, without investing the other few $100, but we're kidding ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have about a dozen guys in here this afternoon, and if the sun went out, we couldn't live. Just couldn't live. So we'll get something. The alternative is to try to balance the whole system again, and he feels that's going to cause more problems than we can solve.
Mm-hmm. I think you commented on that problem before.
We're evidently, I'm no engineer, we're evidently at the end of the line,
Mm-hmm.
and in the process of adjusting all the other hunks, this one seems to be constantly screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving up. We're a noble experiment.
Well, Dick, what is your impression of where the project stands?
Well, right now, I'm not sure where it stands. We should be due to sit down. Certainly, Ren and I have got to get up to date. I'll repeat what I said before. We had a meeting with Arthur Kay, Arthur Murphy, and Tony Zach, along with Ole and Phil, to explore what we saw then as a double project. One, to see if we could get the separate store manager reporting to headquarters off the ground, and simultaneously to...
What was that again? Get the separate store manager.
Separate store manager, divorced from supervision, reporting directly to headquarters. That was the so-called Arthur K. approach. See if we could get agreement on that. And secondly,
Just if I can hold you for just a moment, Dick, why do you put it just that way? Separate store manager reporting to headquarters. Do you see that as the chief objective? I'm just not entirely clear on.
she probably wants to know about that. Yeah. Would you like some coffee?
Yes, sir.
What kind?
Black.
Black? Yeah.
Do you see that as the?
No, I think that's more of a capsule description. It's the store manager operating more independently.
I see.
Without the layers of merchandising supervision and line supervision between him and headquarters.
Well, what do you think of that idea, Dick?
Well, I think it's an excellent idea. The question is, to what degree it can be made operable. I've said that, and this is one of the reasons for our continuing to argue about the thing. I've said that there might be a relatively small number of well-experienced, competent people who could operate this way. And again, it goes back to our cliche of Cis Robo. But that it cannot be the single approach to store management. First, because we don't have the numbers of stores that would support such a person at the kind of salary that would make sense. And secondly, that it's questionable how many, at least of our present store managers, could successfully and happily operate on this turned loose basis.
Now, in the light of what you just said, Dick, do you feel that because of these circumstances, the absence of a sufficient number of qualified people, a sufficient number of stores able to support what would be involved in this kind of arrangement, that it really is not something that's operable? That its operability is in doubt, I gather, from your standpoint and from the standpoint of others in the organization.
Well, at least its operability could not become universal. In other words, if this experiment was successful, we could extend it to a relatively small number of stores. Arbitrarily, for some reason, I've been talking 12 or so, where it looks as if the people in the stores would match up. So that we'd be faced with another type of organization for the balance of the stores. There's a third possibility that has been discussed almost from the beginning, and that's the question of adding to these key stores or master stores a group of satellites. This one bothers me a bit.
Thank you. Adding to the core store a satellite
A
group.
series of satellites that would theoretically take care of the small store problem and still not call for another type of supervision for the small stores. Well, this has bothered me. Our experience has been that when you have a situation of that sort, the master store will suffer. While it may take care of the whole, the key store will be at a level less than we think it should be, with the resident manager sitting there devoting his time to it completely. Then we have the problem of geography. the spread of the big ones and the spread of the little ones is not necessarily such that the master store satellite thing would, again, cover the waterfront.
Mhm.
And so we could still be involved in at least two methods of operation, or possibly three, because of the damn distance between individual
Yeah.
stores, most of which are not master stores.
Oh,
So
excuse me, Nick, go ahead.
I think that we would get value out of the experiment, but that it would be or it would be in a direction that really doesn't relate to the experiment itself. The various freedoms or authorities that Arthur was talking about really are pretty much in effect in the Bradley stores. They do have a much smaller central sales plan. They do have a much greater ability to order the merchandise that they want for balancing their gross and for supplementing the central sales plan. A number of the things that were brought up are really working in Bradley's and have been ever since we started with the gem experiment. And I think the key there is mostly in this area. First, we put the best men we could find into those stores so that they would represent these qualified people. And secondly, it's been a small group with its own merchandising and operating hierarchy. And I think in a small group you can accomplish many of these things and keep the training going and simultaneously keep the supervision going in a much simpler fashion than you can when you're talking in terms of hundreds of units. So I can see value in spreading some of the freedoms as they have been spreading in the Bradley stores, coming as a result of the dramatization that would come out of the experiment. As far as the elimination of layers, I think we still have a problem. That not only the present supervisors, who must see this as a threat to them, but even the men themselves who have been used to having the backup from the supervisors and merchandisers, would certainly in the short run be pretty nervous and uneasy about having freedom thrown at them. But again, I repeat that I think from an experiment of this sort, we would get value, but we would not necessarily get the specific value that we started to talk about for that store, for the group of stores. That it would somehow in the process change from that particular course. But in the process of that change, we'd still get some good from it, I'm sure. So that's why I felt that it was worth pursuing. And also, as we've gone along, when they've continued to discuss how it might be done, I think we get value out of testing just what the situation is, what the situations might be, and solidifying or clarifying our thinking on the whole question of store level and territory level supervision.
What do you see as the next step, Dick?
Well, we have this time commitment. We met with those fellows.
Now, those folks, meaning Kay and Arthur Murphy and so on.
Right. Around the 1st of April. We then asked them, amongst themselves, to talk about what turned out to be the two pieces, the single store manager experiment, and then the possibility of Tony Zach working with other of his store managers, either in the team training direction, which Ren is anxious to try, or by examining his own relationship to the store managers within the traditional zone manager, store manager relationship. And then we were to meet again in the last week of April to see where we stood, and hopefully to push the button to get started on July 1st. Now, the meeting with Mr. Irving and Jay came in between while I was away. Ren has been away, and the first step right now is for me to get a better feel from Ren as to just what was discussed on April 22nd, and see whether we're picking up on the two approaches, or whether it's been resolved that we should concentrate on team training.
What is Ren's feeling, Dick?
Listen, unfortunately, I don't know. He just came back on Monday.
Well, what is this plan, the team training plan, that, what's the background on that? I don't know too much about that.
Well, the purpose of the thing is to see what value can be attained within the store by in the interaction between the store manager and his department heads. The key store people as a group would first meet for a period of a week or so with a trainer to discuss the principles of building a team, working together, and solving problems at the store level.
Who would the trainer be?
The trainer, I think, would be Ren and one of his men initially. I'm pretty sure that Ren and one of his men would first train with a group under Blake, whose ideas generally are things that have come together in this team training bit.
Who's Blake?
Oh, he's a fellow from Texas who has a, oh Lord, I can't think of the name of the concept.
He's not a Stop and Shop employee.
No. He's a psychologist from University of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
He's been working with the AMA people on the refinement of the sensitivity training that they've been working on for the last 10 years. And
So you used him previously?
No.
And it's through Blake's approach that is behind Ren's proposal?
I think Ren, after struggling with the thing off and on, going back to his own AMA experience, has finally come to the conclusion that this combination of the AMA's approach, which has also now been infected with the Bethel T group people, now adding in the specific approaches of Blake, has got the best possibility he's seen so far to do a practical group training job of people who are working together within an organization such as the store. This is something we've been looking at and fooling with for years. It seems to have gelled. He and one of his men would spend a week or so in such a group run by Blake and the AMA people to sharpen up their training approach to it. Then they would, with the teams from one or more stores, try to recreate that training situation. And then this would be a continuing process after the training. The store manager and his department managers would meet together weekly and try to identify their own problems amongst themselves, problems of the store, set up projects that they would work on, and keep the thing rolling and rolling and rolling. I'm sure he could explain more specifically, but this is what came across to us at the time when we were all together.
How does how do Mr. Sidney and Mr. Irving feel about the Blake approach?
This unfortunately, I don't know. I'm sure this was the subject of their meeting on the 22nd.
One thing that I'm a little not clear on, Dick, is I got the impression during my first round of tapes, I recall talking to Don, and I talked to you, but I didn't have you on tape on that occasion, that the chain management, I have the feeling, feels that how shall I put this? That there's considerable leverage in terms of overall Stop and Shop success through changing the climate within the store, the quality of the management of the store, the quality of the leadership in the store, the quality of the relations of supervision to the store, that this is an area which, if articulated correctly, can lead to Stop and Shop success. Now, is this correct? Is this the way management feels about the business?
Yeah. I think what we're stewing about is the approach to take to move in the direction of better store management.
Is this considered, Dick, this may help me, is this considered to be a high priority item?
I don't know how to answer that.
If you're doing $300 million worth of business and you see that there's a prospect maybe of moving on to 3.5 through the kind of personnel practices, the kind of supervisory structure, the taking greater advantage of the entrepreneurial initiative and skill of your first line management, then there are damn few ways that you can make an extra $50 million in gross. I don't know if I'm talking realistic figures, and you might come away with the conclusion that, by golly, this, it's more worth putting our efforts into this than it is putting our greater efforts into merchandising or something else. Here's an area which, if developed, can bring in lots of dollars, make for happier people, give them a more meaningful role to play in their business lives, and at the same time, and be mutually advantageous. They get something out of it, higher salary. The chain sells more product. Is this...
Well, no, your exposition of it would make it sound as if this were the be-all and end-all. This definitely is not.
Is not. What is the be-all and the end-all?
I don't think there's any one single thing.
Well, what are the other competing things, Dick?
Well,
In other words, what does management see as its major problems?
I have to have a longer tape.
I'll stay here. I'll come back as often as you like.
All right, I'd rather see if I could
All right, go ahead. Sure, you
put this
take it any
thing,
way you want. Sure.
into perspective.
Yeah.
It's a problem. It's an important problem. It's by no means the only important problem. There is a great difference of opinion in terms of the degree of centralization and decentralization that makes sense for us, for the industry. And there are degrees of variation that are tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few companies, including independents, now, where the store manager is the be-all and end-all. The successful independents today are those that are in cooperative groups. And one of the reasons for their success, I think, is the fact that they accept advice, planning, in the areas of merchandising and operation from a central group. This is the value of getting the experience of others and not having to noodle out everything yourself and make all your mistakes yourself and so on. So that even in the so-called independent business today, the owner-manager seems to be making progress as a member of a group.
What will be example of such? What chain are you thinking of now, Dick?
Any of the large cooperative groups, the IGAs, the red and whites, and on down to the little individual wholesaler who may only have 20 or 30 or 40, or cooperative buying groups where numbers of independents get together. These seem to gradually get to the point where there is a value out of a central operation, whether it's a buying value, a price information value, operation, materials handling sort of a thing, all of the same sorts of things. In other words, that we thought of as change. Now been combined with the individual entrepreneur point of view to make the independent cooperative the toughest competition we have. So,
Is that a fact? It is the toughest competition you have? Why is it the toughest? Why is price-wise, service-wise?
well, one of the offshoots, of course, is that very few of them are unionized, so there's an extreme advantage in terms of payroll ratio. But again, it's the value of the owner-manager, the part of the community, the degree to which he can move on his own, make a fast decision, get into operation without having to consult 19 people, even though this seems to be in conflict with what I said about the value of working with a group.
Is it in conflict?
It doesn't seem to be. Doesn't seem to be. Yet, in terms of words, it sounded like a conflict in terms of what I was saying before. But there's a combination of the individual decision making and the value of the central service to the individual operator that seems to have melded together into a real tough situation to meet from a normal.
Are you suggesting there's some kind of an optimal combination of decentralization, freedom to move, and planning, central planning?
Well, this is I think what's happened with the in the cooperative. The question is, does this apply directly or in part because of the function of size and geographic separation, communication, and so forth?
I'm not clear on that.
Well, I don't think, assuming that my premise that the reason that they're the toughest competitors is this neat combination of the individual and the group. Assuming that were true, it does not necessarily follow
Yes.
that if it is identified that it can be taken and put into a large chain corporate structure. In other words, I don't think there's any one way that is successful universally.
Mm-hmm. It may be unique to their particular size, geographical location, and other features. That if you were a 30-store chain with a certain type of geographical distribution, then it might be transferable. But given 150 stores, Blardley's, and so on, that particular blend may not be operable in this
And I
environment.
have to include history.
And history. Oh.
Because of the individuals in our company who've been brought up
Mm-hmm.
in a different fashion.
Yeah. Well, now, just let me going back to the issue of priorities in management's thinking, Dick. This issue now that we've just been discussing, and you've said that one can identify some very successful experience along these lines, and that this arrangement, looked at from a dollars and cents point of view, pays off. That the profits which can be earned under this arrangement are greater than the profits which might be earned under some other arrangement. Is that a proper?
No, I think you're ahead of the thing still.
Well, I'm talking about the IGA, say, assuming that they can be taken as an example of a particular blend, and you identified this as what appears to be a successful blend, at least a blend with which you are finding it
Well,
increasingly.
we're not sure that it's necessarily more profitable. All we're saying is that this makes them very difficult competitors. Does not necessarily mean that they're making twice as much money as we are. But compared to the competitive strength of the previous situation where you had individuals who were working on their own, these fellows are much tougher now than their counterparts were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Mm-hmm.
the point to the thing. And again, there's the question, even assuming that they were twice as profitable, can the same circumstances be picked up bodily and inserted into companies such as ours? So what I was really trying to say is that we feel that there are advantages to be gained for the company and for the individual if we can move in the direction of having a stronger, more flexible store manager. But this is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. And there are many other problems that have to be tied into it. It's not necessarily the most important priority project. And even if it were, it would have to be on a parallel basis about 5 other things to go along with it.
What would be some of the other things?
Well, I don't think that we are, at the moment, as well organized and staffed in our buying merchandising situation as we should be. We have training and development of people to do in every division of the business. We have to continue to push on manufacturing rapidly as we can. And that's a double barrel thing. It's just isn't just putting up plants, but putting up plants, getting the production worked into the overall merchandising. There's certainly the current problem of trying to find out what's the best mix for us right now in terms of gross profit expense, sales level to come out on the bottom line. We have the whole problem of location strategy for the immediate future and for the long-run future. We have dozens of individual people problems, positive and negative development. And you can go on and on and on. And it would be wrong to say that this is number one and has the possibility of radically changing the sales and profit picture, completely and utterly ahead of the other things.
The reason that impression was fostered in my mind, Dick, grows out of comments that various of your executives made. I recall Don, for example, said, when I remarked that I had talked to Kay and had come away with the feeling this was a very successful store, and I think Don rather spontaneously said, if we had 150 guys like that, our problems would be over. And with a statement like that, one is inclined to say, well, let's see what we can do about getting 150 Ks. Everybody realizes it's going to be an extremely difficult job, but if that has as much gold wrapped around it as Don implied, you'd think this is an awful good place to begin to restructure and have a lot of leverage in this, both for Arthur and all of his counterparts and for the chain.
But again, go back to what I said in the beginning. I don't think this is a 150 store possibility.
But would you subscribe to the statement that if every one of your stores had an Arthur K in it, that the picture of Stop and Shop life would be drastically different? This chain would be a damn sight more successful than it is right now?
Yeah, but this still has to be put back into the total company complex. This would not automatically solve all our problems. This would not solve all our buying problems, our warehousing problems, our transportation problems, our financial problems, our manufacturing problems, our personnel problems, our construction and maintenance problems.
Yeah, so, well, just to repeat, I came away with the impression that Don had the feeling, and I had the feeling that others had the feeling as well. Store managers of that quality bring in business, and when you add up what 150 of them would bring in, it's represents a significant increase in sales. You know, I did some interviews in Natick. I don't know if you know about this. I went out and talked to about 20 women. I was interested to find out whether Kay was known to them and how much of a personal following he might have. The results suggested that there was evidence of this. It didn't shine through like a searchlight, but there were lots of flashlights around, suggesting that there was a basis to believe that Arthur, I haven't mentioned this to Arthur yet, he knows that I was out there, but I'm going to tell him more about it when I see him.
I don't think there's any question about it. You just watch him in the store and the number of people that he not only talks to, but calls by name, and the number of people who know him, there's no question that there's a I'm not trying in any way to say this is not an important problem. Just saying that this is not necessarily the only problem, or necessarily the number one problem. I don't think any of us knows how to put a value on it. But again, and I think this goes back to the arguing that we've done about the project. Now, even assuming...
Now, when you say the project...
Oh, the particular Store 7 project.
Now, what do you take to be the genesis of that so-called K project, the Store 7 project?
Well, it has a number of identifiable points. As I think you know, we tried some time ago to attack the problem of giving the store managers more autonomy, more freedom. Because we did have a belief that this would lead to better results at the store level, and particularly at the large store level.
When was this?
Well, this was 3 or 4 years back.
What happened to that?
We failed. We think that we failed for 2 reasons. One is that we hadn't thought it through sufficiently. And secondly, that it was opposed by the supervision, who didn't believe that it made sense, and who also must have seen it as an attack on their function. So that was one takeoff point for it. And the more immediate one, I think, was a result of our discussions and the work that your fellows did.
Now, why might they be receptive? Why might management be receptive to this in the light of the past experience? I should think they'd approach this with considerable concern because of the fact that you couldn't get it off the ground, make it work.
Well, there are many things that you can't get off the ground the first time that you don't abandon. Very often you have to back off and start again when you either concede a new approach or when conditions have changed. I think the great big thing that changed in between was the Bradley's experience in these stores. And again, I think for the 2 reasons. One, we picked the best guys that we could, and it was a small operation, almost a separate operation within the larger group. And those stores have been successful. One of the reasons that they've been successful, we think, is that the store managers in those stores have more freedoms.
Was this freedom by design or by accident, this newfound freedom that they got?
No, this was by design.
It was by design. This was deliberately structured on the hypothesis that given that freedom, certain things would follow. Who pushed that idea?
Well, I think originally Dick Solomon and I spent quite a bit of time as he first went into the gym discussing the values of operating in this direction and under conventional control.
What is the germinal process there, Dick? Is it a case of you and Dick Solomon sitting down and saying, well, why don't we've got several options how we can set this up? I'm interested in the process by which you got to the Bradley arrangement.
Well, I don't think it is, I don't think it could be that clearly defined, and on such and such a day, we had such and such a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But,
But it was a conscious choice.
oh yeah.
Now, how do Mr. Sidney and Mr. Irving feel about this? Do they worry about these questions, or do they think that other people are worrying about these questions? Is it Wren's job?
I don't really know the answer. Certainly they're concerned enough. I mean, we've constantly over the years worked around the subject. I think there are two basic pieces to it. One, that if we could develop the store managers, that we would get the individual store results of the sort that we think we see in 7 and in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I think there's a feeling that given this, we could simplify the structure between headquarters and the stores. We might not need as many specialists, some managers, and so on. Direction of streamlining, reducing all of the stages of communication. But it's seldom been attacked as a vertical project. It's interwoven with the dozens of other things that are going on simultaneously. I think it's implicit in all the various attempts that we've made along the way at training of all store people from clerks on up. And I don't think anyone has today. This is the reason for our discussion about the thing over these months. Has a clear-cut, simple answer. Do this, and you're automatically going to get the result. And I don't think anyone can say from our experience or anybody else's experience in the industry that you get to this simple situation, very competent store managers, nobody else in between, and you're going to be successful.
Well, Dick, now thinking about what we will call now the Store 7 project or experiment, whatever term we want to use, what is your feeling now about the responsibility for this? Where is it at the moment? Is there a locus of responsibility for this? Is it you?
I think it's a joint responsibility of mine and of Wren's. And Wren definitely has a part in it.
Where does this, the reason that I ask about this is that having been present at the meetings of the faculty club when this was being discussed, I was not clear at that time how you fellows were seeing yourselves being set up.
Oh, I think
What specifically happened? I remember Mr. Sidney commented at that time about his general interest in this. Mr. Irving commented, and you and Don and Charlie and so on. Wren was there on one occasion, I think.
Well, subsequent to that, Wren, Bob Knowles, and I had several discussions, and we sat with Ole and Phil, and, at least 2 or 3 of them, to continue to try to argue the thing out and refine it to the point where we had the meeting early in April with the 3 fellows specifically involved.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first time actually that we talked to anyone outside the original group. that there was a possibility that we would go at this, and how did they feel about it. So that,
Now, did you have a pretty well-defined idea at the time you brought them into it, Dick?
yes.
And did you have a sort of a vision of what this would be like if tried? Was that ever, what exists to describe that? Was this just something that you and Ren and Bob had sort of agreed on? Is it in writing anywhere?
Well, we have a number of things. Phil produced a couple of papers, and we have the minutes of the discussions that we had. We have not tried to pin the whole thing down. So the stage at which we were then was to expose the guys to it, find out whether they felt it was worth.
When you expose the guys to what? Just to a general idea?
No,
or
more
to
than
a
general
detailed
idea.
plan?
More than a general, not a detailed plan, but a detailed list of things that should be considered. The freedoms that Arthur himself had talked about, the things that were possible, the things that were not possible.
Go ahead,
They did it deliberately on that basis, so that then they were the fellows who were going to come back with a detailed plan, which would then turn into the project write-up.
I see. What
We avoided-
Arthur and Zach and
Arthur
Arthur Murphy would bring back.
In other words, we avoided completely having a canned program to say, here fellows, this is the way it's going to be. We talked about the approach generally and covered as many specifics as either we thought we could bring up or the fellows themselves wanted to bring up. And the next step of the thing would have been a review of that after they'd had a month to think it over. And at that point, we would turn it into a specific written proposal.
But there's a chance that will never happen now, I take it.
Yeah. In that way, directly, yes.
Well, I was a little concerned about how Arthur Kay responds to this, having been, involved in and expectations created about something that was obviously of great interest to him.
Well, I'm sure that there will be things done. See, again, I repeat that many of the things that he thought were impossible are not only possible, but they are in being in the Bradleys, and actually in being in conventional stores. Many of the things that he asked for can be done, are being done in conventional stores today. We haven't gotten to the point of saying that to him blankly. But many of the things, not all of them, but many of the things that he wants to do, he can do in cooperation with his supervision. Many of the things he can do specifically himself. I don't think he's aware of this fact, and that other people are doing them.
From the standpoint of an outsider, I must say this comes as a little surprise, because Arthur, being a go-getter type, I would have picked up the impression. I haven't talked to many store managers, but I certainly would have picked up the impression that Arthur was at the frontier of.
Well, I think this is an impression that all of the fellows in your group have, and we've tried to tell them many, many times. But Arthur's a good man, but there are at least a dozen like him, with different types of characteristics. They're not as vocal, they're not as outgoing, they're not as colorful. But he's by no means the #1 manager in the chain. He's a good man. And with the combination of characteristics that he has, he's doing a good job. But he's not #1.
The fact that Arthur came to have the role in art thinking that he did grew out of chance factors. Charlie had given me the names of 4 or 5 store managers sort of off the top of his head, and because I said that I'd like to go out and have a chance to talk with people and put together some information, and I got Frank, and I didn't put Frank on tape, but I got Arthur, and I had McGinnis down in Dedham, and I have a tape which nobody's ever heard yet, from the manager of the store over in Needham.
Well, see, of that group, if you had them all on tape, none of them would come through.
Yeah.
The way Arthur would.
Yeah. Well, Arthur not only came through, but he obviously had a very successful store, and there was the suggestion that he created. That there was he created in my mind the notion that Arthur as Arthur was a distinct factor in success. Now, obviously, location was an important factor there. I think you had an awfully good choice of location in Natick for that store. Weathersfield was so situated that many people would go there because it was the best place to go. But despite all that, we came away, certainly I came away with the feeling that here's a fella who has shown a lot of initiative and who wants opportunity for a good deal more. And I think these were the germinal ideas which sort of suggested, well, isn't this a good thing for the chain to look into? Now, obviously, the chain had been thinking about this for a long time. As you say, the experiment goes, as the thought behind the experiment goes back many years.
Oh, I'm not in any way trying to say that Arthur is not a good manager. I'm going the other direction, which we tried to explain. And this was one of the reasons why this experiment makes some sense, even though it's not universal. Assuming that we worked out the bits and pieces and so forth, there are probably a dozen other stores and a dozen other men who may be completely different in their personal characteristics from Arthur, to whom we'd like to give the same kind of autonomy, freedom, and so forth, and see how they would develop.
Well, can it, in any sense, be called an experiment, Dick, if you've already established that you've already evolved into, or by design created a situation wherein some store managers have more freedom, then in what sense can this be thought of as an experiment at all?
Well, I think first, even though there may not be a single unique feature, that the combination of all of the features and seeing how we can move ahead to make the good managers more effective is desirable. The other part of it is the possibility of the reduction of the steps in supervision between the store managers. When I say these fellows are successful, they are within the normal framework. They are working within the system. They have been able to move along the lines that Arthur's talking about. Bill Frank is the best example. Any number of the things that Arthur is talking about, he's had for years. Mostly, of course,
For
because
example,
that was the key stuff. Any item that he wants, the buyers get for him. If there's a desire on his part for a particular physical change in the store's been remodeled about 19 times. Now, Bill does not ask specifically for this or that. He's not that kind of a guy, but he will yak and agitate until we put together the bits and pieces and give him a better meat pack or a larger sales area or improved shelving and so forth. And again, I'm not picking him out as a prime example, except historically, since that was the point of the fleet over the years and so forth. And Bill has been there since for many years. This is an example of things having been done within the framework with a person, again, agitating and getting action. Now, he's not autonomous in any sense, and he's a guy who needs supervision. He needs help because he's not a prime technician. Like Arthur, he's a tremendous customer relations and has been. He's not a good technician. The combination of the people put in the store to complement his strengths and the supervisors and merchandisers working with him, this has been very successful. For most of the time, he's been at either the top or within the top 3 or 4 whenever it was changed.
Dick, it's now 10:15. Do you?
I have to go
you
get
have
some blood.
Yeah. Can you give me about another 5 minutes?
Go away, knock the door down.
Are they going to come for you?
Well, someone will get agitated.
Right.
Supposed to be there.
Right.
10:15.
Oh, well, is just one point, Dick, going back to Ren's thinking about team training. Now, is this presently conceived as a substitute for, as an alternative to the so-called Store 7 experiment? Is it one or the other, or might there be both?
No, as we left it when we met in April, we were talking about the possibility of both.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know any reason why there has to be a single one. I think his point of bringing it in and fighting to get it accomplished simultaneously is his belief that this can be of value across the board. The relationship of the team within the store, and then the relationship of the store and the supervisory group. Mm-hmm. Universal application, whether it's a big store or a store manager store or a smaller store. And I think this is the reason why he's pressing so strongly for it. And I think the reason that he has not been as excited about the single store experiment is, as he said, it's rigged for success. And secondly, how far can it be applied as a specific? So as of the moment, my feeling is that there's no reason in the world why we can't do something in both areas.
Do you think it's rigged for success?
Yeah.
So so you're not going to prove much. If it's inevitably successful.
I think, again, I think the only thing that we can prove, assuming that this is successful, is that it will apply to a relatively small number of stores. But this in itself is a worthy goal.
How does Mr. Sidney feel about the alternative, or the,
Unfortunately,
or Mr. Irving?
if I hadn't been on vacation on April 22nd, I could sound much more knowledgeable when I was around. It's unfortunate that we haven't. Naturally, with
Well, who will make the decision, Dick, as to whether both go forward or just one goes forward?
Oh, I think Irving will ultimately.
Well, Dick, I very, very much appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Well, I wish that I had had a chance